Hello, how is everyone doing today? Great to be with you this afternoon. Always fun to check in with people. We haven't done a live this early in the day in a long time, so this will be good for our European fans, probably not so good for our Australian folks and our Asian folks, but yeah, this will be great. Here we are, and we're going to have an afternoon chat. This is going to be lots of fun because it's early in the day, and I do have plenty of unnamed diet beverage. I've got an arsenal of unnamed diet beverage sitting next to me right off screen, so you can't see the corporate logos on it. And we are going to have a great afternoon chat. I like to just hop on here, do them the way we always do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. You know, the more the merrier, the more people here, the more fun we have, the better our conversation is. If you've got a question for me, shoot me a super chat. Our format will be opening remarks, roll call, super chat, question and answers. So that's how we'll do it. And let's try to get this everywhere. Get this, get this up on Reddit. Get this on your Facebook. Get this on your Twitter. Put it up on Bunker Chan. I've never heard of Bunker Chan, but apparently there's this website called Bunker Chan where people are talking about us. So put it on Bunker Chan if you want to put it on Bunker Chan, right? Put it everywhere. Hit the notifications bell, hit the like button. Let's get rolling. We've got plenty to talk about today. I am ready to answer your super chat questions in the second half of the show. I'm ready to do the roll call, but before that, I'm going to jump into my opening remarks. So, folks, India. Folks, 250,000 is not the number of people that are going out on strike right now. The number of people in India who are on strike is 250 million. 250 million people in India right now are on strike. And thank you, A. Coco, for the super chat. 250 million people are on strike. 250 million people are on strike. Now, why are the people of India on strike? Why is this massive outpouring happening? Well, folks, I want to go over some quick history. India is a capitalist country. After the Second World War, unlike China, they did not have a socialist revolution. They did have a nationalist revolution. They did defeat the British Empire and drive them out, but property relations never changed. Now, what's interesting is that after World War II, there was a period in India's history where you had Popular Front governments. These were not socialist governments, but they were kind of national bourgeoisie elements, part of the Congress Party, that were in an alliance with the Communist Party. And because India had a big enough capitalist class, it was able to enter an alliance with the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union heavily invested in India. The Soviet Union built steel mills in India. The Soviet Union did a lot of good things for India. But India remained a capitalist country. It had a bourgeois nationalist government under the Congress Party, Indira Gandhi, other leaders. These were progressives, but they never changed property relations. India never moved towards socialism. It was always a Popular Front government. And you'll notice that as a result of the fact that in India you had a huge communist party, right? In India, the Communist Party was very, very big and massive, and the Soviet Union was a good friend of the Popular Front government of India during the Cold War. There were a lot of social democratic and Keynesian reforms that were put into practice in India to make life easier. I mean, for example, a lot of people were hired by the Indian government to do good work, to build things, right? And some infrastructure was built, and that there were a lot of jobs programs, and there were efforts to try and alleviate some of the extreme poverty in India that was carried out by the Popular Front government. One of the policies that the Popular Front government of the Cold War era in India put into effect was that the government of India purchased agricultural goods and sold them to private companies. And that way, the farmers of India, because India has a vast agricultural sector, a lot of farmers in India, a lot of rural farmers, the farmers of India would have their goods and the cost of agricultural products and produce subsidized by the state. If the government is the sole purchaser the sole purchaser of agricultural products. The government can set the price of food, and then the government buys the agricultural products and sells them to private entities. Now, what's the question here? Can you recommend readings for one's capitalism-loving older relative? Okay. Readings for older relatives. So in India, as part of this reform, the farmers were able to get a huge subsidy from the government because the government would buy their products at a price set by the state and then sell it to private agribusiness companies like Monsanto and others. So recently, we've had an announcement from Modi, the current leader of India. Modi is not from the Congress Party, which was kind of the liberal Social Democratic Party. That's the other major party in India. Modi is from the BJP, which is a Hindu nationalist party. And BJP, and particularly Modi himself, they have a history of anti-Islamic bigotry. They're tied to massacres of Muslims. They're awful right-wing racists. In a weird way, though, they came to power, and this is what people don't understand. After the Cold War was over, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Congress Party of India, the liberal kind of progressive party, moved to the right and started engaging in privatizations. So the BJP got the upper hand. It's very similar to what happened with the Democrats and Trump. Because the Congress Party of India was kind of selling out what it stood for and was opening India up to multinational corporations, the right wing, the BJP, the Hindu nationalists, kind of got the energy. And in some cases, Modi seemed like he might be more pro-Russia, pro-China than the Congress Party, right? You know, and Modi is kind of like a Trump. He's a right-wing nationalist who's a little bit more anti-imperialist than the mainstream liberals. So Modi got into office as kind of talking, hate for Muslims, but also this kind of right-wing Indian nationalism, very, very religious, Hindu stuff. And so Modi has been in office. And Modi claims, just like Trump, just like Duterte, just like Erdogan, he claims to be a nationalist. He's fighting for India, right? But he's entered an alliance with Trump. Modi hates China, and Trump hates China. So Modi has locked himself in with Donald Trump and with U.S. imperialism. And as a result of that, Modi has repeatedly had his arms twisted by the U.S. imperialists, right? They forced him to basically force all of India into the banking system, right? There's a lot of families in India, for example, that had jewelry and piles of gold in their basement and stuff like that. Well, Modi, very famously, to serve Wall Street and the international financial system, he twisted the arm. He passed a law that if you have gold, if you have money, you have to put it in the banks. And that was a huge gift to the Western financial system. Well, the latest move by Modi is getting rid of this subsidy to the farmers of India. He is getting rid of it. He's making it so farmers will sell their products directly to Monsanto, directly to the private companies, right? So that's a huge blow to the farmers of India. This subsidy program that was set up during the Cold War when India had a Popular Front government, gotten rid of. Meanwhile, Modi has been privatizing. Does Russia have any modern problems that could be... Okay. Modern problems. Now, the other thing is that they have been privatizing government industries, privatizing government, the government aspects, things that are run by the government in India are being privatized. So Modi, despite claiming to be a nationalist who's fighting for the people of India, has been selling his people down the river, right? Because he's entered an alliance with the imperialists, because he's entered an alliance with Wall Street against China, and against the people of China, against the people of the world, he made a deal with Satan, right? With Trump, with Wall Street, with Western capitalist imperialism. He made a deal with Satan. So he might claim that he's a nationalist, right? He might claim he's fighting for the people of India. He may even have said some good things criticizing the Congress Party for their pro-imperialist policies. But at the end of the day, he made a deal. He made a deal with the U.S. imperialists to go along with their anti-China hate campaign. And so now he is being forced to sell his people down the river, sell out the farmers of India. And so the farmers of India have decided they ain't going to take it anymore. And we saw some of the biggest protests in recent Indian history. All kinds of farmers piled into the streets, marched into the cities to protest this. Well, the labor unions of India also are suffering under Modi's neoliberal free market reforms. So the labor unions have also gone out into the streets. And you're welcome, Donald. So the labor unions of India are now on strike in solidarity with the farmers. And they have come up with these demands that they are making, an end to privatizations, guaranteeing high wages to the workers, guaranteeing, fair prices for the farmers. This is an uprising in India. The workers and the farmers of India are rising up. And here is what is not being reported on it in U.S. media. I mean, nothing's being said about it in U.S. media at all. But here's what people don't understand. It is communists that are leading this strike. Folks, if you go to any other country in the world, if you go outside of the United States, the labor movement, labor unions, they're going to be run by communists, right? I mean, social democrats, communists, right? It's only in the United States where we've had McCarthyism and decades of anti-communism. There's actually a law. It is actually illegal for any communist to be elected to office within a labor union. I bet you didn't know that. It's called the Taft-McCarran Act. It was a law that made it illegal for any communist to be elected to a position in a labor union. So in the United States, communists are not widely represented in the labor movement. They're there, right? The ILWU, the International Longshore Warehouse Union, is very close to the Communist Party. And there are some, the United Electrical Workers, UE, has a relationship with different communist groups. But for the most part, communists in the United States are kind of marginalized in the labor movement. But this is a huge, huge exception. The United States was the center of global anti-communism during the Cold War. Any other country you go to Britain, you go to France, you go to Germany, especially if you go to the so-called global south or the developing world, any country in South America, any country in Asia or Africa, communists are at the center of the labor unions. Even in Taiwan, right? Taiwan, it's long history, it's an anti-communist government, but they've got the Taiwan Labor Party, and they are leading the labor unions. So any other country in the world, you're going to have communists at the center of the labor movement. You don't have it in the United States because of our weird history, since the Second World War. So in India, the labor federations are basically dominated by communists, right? And there are 3 major communist parties in India. And I have had the honor of meeting people from all 3 of these communist parties. Some of them I met when they sent delegations to New York City and to the West. Some of them I met when I was at global communist gatherings at the the World Festival of Youth and Students. But I want to talk about the 3 communist parties in India that are leading this strike. And you need to know about all 3 of them, right? Because it's important, right? These are important parties to know. Right? And we're going to talk about a group of communists in India that are pretty irrelevant. We're going to talk about that too. But I'm going to go over the 3 major communist parties in India so you can understand who they are. UN failed to save, yes, Afghanistan. We'll talk about Afghanistan. All right. Execution. All right. So let's go over the 3 major communist parties in India that are worth looking into. The biggest communist party in India is called the Communist Party of India Marxist, and CPIM, Communist Party of India Marxist. They are a party that basically runs the government of Kerala, the province of Kerala. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a province in India, and they are the ruling party in Kerala, the CPIM. And what's interesting is the Communist Party of India Marxist was a pro-China breakaway from the Indian Communist Party, right? The Communist Party of India supported the Soviet Union. The Sino-Soviet split happened, and India had a very good relationship with the Soviet Union. And so So a new party was formed. A number of new parties were formed, that were breakaways from the official Indian Communist Party that were pro-China. The Communist Party of India, Marxist, was the major pro-China breakaway. Now, they followed China's political line. They argued the Soviet Union was social imperialists. And they were a Maoist party. They called themselves Communist Party of India, Marxist. They did not support the Naxalites, though. When the Naxals launched like an armed, guerrilla war in the countryside, they didn't support it. They were a group of Maoists. They did not support that, the armed campaign. They supported China's foreign policy. They opposed the government of India when it was clashing with China. That's the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Now, what's interesting is after the rise of Deng Xiaoping in China, the Communist Party of India Marxists started to become more independent, right? Because China at the time, was moving in a more free market direction, having a bigger market sector, etc. So because of that, after that, the Communist Party of India Marxists stopped really, it was still friendly to China, and they still are very friendly to China, but it stopped having like an official relationship with the Chinese government. It was friendly to the Soviet Union again, it was friendly to Cuba, and it is just a major communist party in India that comes out of the Maoist tradition, but it has moved back into mainstream communist politics, and it has really emphasized getting elected. The Communist Party of India Marxist very much emphasizes getting elected. They hold a lot of seats in the Indian parliament. And on top of that, they dominate Kerala and they run labor unions. That's the biggest communist party in India. The Communist Party of India Marxist, from the Maoist tradition, but is now kind of a general communist party. And I will never forget when I went to a reception in 2013 at the World Festival of Youth and Students for the Vietnamese Communist Party, and the young people from the Communist Party of India Marxist, they had a chant to support the people of Vietnam, because apparently during the Vietnam War, the Communist Party of India Marxist led many demonstrations in support of the Vietnamese people. And their chant was, "Your name, my name, Vietnam, Vietnam." Right? I guess with kind of an Indian accent and the dialect, name is Nam, right? It rhymes in the way that they speak in that part of the world and with that dialect. So they would chant, "Your Nam, my Nam, Vietnam, Vietnam. Your name, my name, Vietnam, Vietnam." That was the chant that the people of India were taught by the Communist Party of India Marxist, and that leading huge demonstrations against the Vietnam War is where the Communist Party of India Marxist comes from. I mean, they're just an anti-imperialist revolutionary party. They went along with China, but then they kind of, in the 80s, they became more of an independent party. And they're very friendly to the Communist Party of the United States. They're very friendly. They were very friendly to the Soviet Union at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's the Communist Party of India Marxist. Now, there's another party that you should know about, which is the official Communist Party of India. And they were the pro-Soviet party, Communist Party of India. And they were big on emphasizing that they believed India's Popular Front government, the Congress Party, and their alliance with the Soviets was important. And they worked very, very hard to support the Congress Party and to make sure that India remained a Soviet-aligned country. And they had a lot of influence. And within the coalition government, right, that the Congress Party had, they were the pro-Soviet voice. And they run a lot of labor unions as well. The Communist Party of India, they're the official Communist Party. Communist Party of India Marxist was a pro-China breakaway from them. They still have a lot of seats in the parliament. They still have lots of members. So that's another Communist Party in India, the official Communist Party of India, right? Now, there's another Communist Party in India that I've had the honor of meeting with, which is called the Socialist Unity Center of India Communist, SUCI, SUSI is what they call it. Now, the Socialist Unity Center of India, fascinating. So, during the Second World War, right, India was a British colony, and, Japan and Germany were fighting against Britain and the United States and the Soviet Union. So the official Communist Party of India, got to turn the painting back on, right? The official Communist Party of India argued that it was necessary, vote fraud, Biden. Vote fraud, Biden. All right. It was, the official Communist Party of India during World War II, okay? Because the British were anti-fascist, because the British were aligned with the Soviet Union, because the British were aligned with China and with the United States and against the Nazis and against the Japanese. The official Communist Party of India argued that it was necessary to stop fighting the British imperialists during World War II. It was necessary to have an alliance, an anti-fascist alliance with the British. And they were probably right. That the British, the British were less of a threat than the Nazis and the Japanese were. So on that basis, the communists of India, called for everything, focus on defeating Japan, focus on defeating Germany. But there was an intellectual who was a Marxist in India, a communist, who didn't agree with that. He's a lot like Michel Aflaq in the Ba'ath countries. He was a lot like, there's different thinkers throughout the world. There was an anti-British, anti-imperialist activist in India named Shibdas Ghosh. And Shibdas Ghosh argued that it was not necessary. It was not necessary to enter an alliance with British imperialism against Japan. He argued that it was necessary for the people of India to keep fighting for their independence against the British during World War II. So he was kicked out of the Communist Party of India because he refused to support a wartime alliance with the British Empire. So he formed his own party, and it was called the Socialist Unity Center of India Communist. And he actually, interestingly, had his own army. During World War II, he actually formed an army of people that fought the British and got support from Japan to fight the British during World War II. He was an Indian nationalist who was so committed to India's independence from the British that he formed an armed group and got weapons from Japan to fight the British in India from Japan. Now, after World War II, that ended. But of course, he was not welcome in the Communist Party of India. So he formed the Socialist Unity Center of India Communist. And they're another very important communist party in India. And it was led by Shibdas Ghosh. And Shibdas Ghosh was this anti-colonial fighter who had opposed the alliance during World War II. And Shibdas Ghosh, his party, the Socialist Unity Center of India Communist, they are very important. And they also became Maoists. They embraced, China. They're a Marxist-Leninist party. That they have pictures of Mao everywhere. And they were sympathetic to China. They're another very big communist party in India that comes out of that split, right? That they didn't want to stop fighting the British during World War II. So those are the three parties in India that are on the vanguard of this strike, right? The SUSI, Socialist Unity Center of India Communist, the Communist Party of India, and the Communist Party of India Marxist. Those are the three parties that are on the vanguard of this struggle. It's very fascinating. Now, there's another, unfortunately, because leftists in the West, we are just completely out of touch with everything, right? We don't know what's going on, right? I mean, there's a lot of confusion on the internet. People keep bringing up the Naxals, right? The Naxalites, right? And there's a lot of people in the West who are convinced that oh my God, the Naxals are like the most important communist group in the world, the Naxals of India. Well, folks, I got to tell you, the Naxals, right? So what are the Naxals? All right, so in the 60s, in the 1960s, there was a group of pro-China communists in India who started launching an armed uprising against the government of India. Right? They wanted to form like a people's war, an armed uprising. They went into the countryside, tried to carve out liberated territory. The area that they started their uprising was called Naxalbari. And so for whatever reason, these Mao-esque or pro-Mao communists in India that launched an armed uprising, they are known as Naxalites because that's where their armed uprising started. Now, there are over 51 different Naxalite groups in India at this point. 51 different parties that call themselves Naxalites. They operate in rural areas, mainly in Andhra Pradesh, which is a particular region, and they operate in rural areas, and they engage in armed attacks against police, and they engage in a lot of basically criminal activity. They rob people, basically. They rob people and they get money from them. There's a couple areas that they control, but not really. They don't really have that much influence. And the Naxalites, they are in the rural areas, and they have some areas that they've carved out of. The government of India considers them to be terrorists, and so do the major communist parties. The Communist Party of India, Marxist, considers them terrorists. The Socialist Unity Center of India considers them terrorists. The Communist Party of India considers them terrorists. Why? Because they have murdered members of all three of the major communist parties in India. Naxalites have murdered leaders of the CPIM, of SUSI, and of CPI. And the Naxalites, they take the position that only the countryside is revolutionary, and that the people in the urban centers of India are not revolutionary, right? That only the rural peasantry in India is revolutionary. They're trying to carry out a really outdated strategy of waging a rural people's war in the countryside like Mao did in the 1930s. And they are violent, and they murder communists, communists from other parties. On top of that, they are really fractured. There are 51 different Naxal groups. I think every little village and region has its own Naxal party. There's a million of them. The Communist Party of India Maoist, the Communist Party of India Naxalite, the Communist Party of India Maoist Unity Center, and there's a million of them. And they hate modern China. They think modern China is an evil social imperialist country. And they murder leaders of the actual communist parties in India, and they're an ultra-leftist current. What's interesting is, the Naxalites, Nepal is a country that borders India, and that there was a party in Nepal that was similar to the Naxalites, the Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist. But they won, They actually carved out some liberated territories, and when they won, when they started actually getting into a position of actually winning, their politics changed, and they aligned with the other communist parties of Nepal. They formed the United Communist Party of Nepal. They are friendly to China now. So there was this this group of Naxal-ish communists in Nepal, but they won, and now that they overthrew the king, they won seats in the government. They've changed. Public school uniforms. Alrighty, and they've changed. So so that's kind of fascinating. But yeah, the Naxalites, right? The Naxalites, they are not leading these protests that are happening. I mean, there might be one group, one place. I'm sure there's somebody going and handing out some leaflets or something. But overall, the labor movement in India, the farmers' mobilizations, this is the Communist Party of India Marxist, this is the Socialist Unity Center of India Communist, this is the CPI, Communist Party of India. The Naxals are not leading it. They are just not. And that, there's a lot of people who don't understand that they think the Naxalites are so sexy because they have guns and they're revolutionary and they chant the right magical incantations about Mao Zedong thought and Presidente Gonzalo and all of that. But they really are not where it's at, right? I mean, it's one thing for them to have their strategy of waging rural people's war, but at the point that they're actually murdering leaders of other communist parties, the fact that they make no effort to build up a support, a layer of support among the people of the urban centers. India has the second largest industrial working class in the entire world. The Naxals are ultra-left adventurers and mainly have degenerated into criminal elements at this point. They're not really, fighting for socialism. It's just a way of life. These people are all wanted. They can't go back to normal life because they're outlaws, so they're just kind of supporting themselves by robbing people. And it's sad. And this is what happens when you fetishize armed struggle, right? There are situations where people have to, where people have no choice, right, but to defend their community and their neighborhood from violence, and take up arms. But when you fetishize violence, when violence becomes an end unto itself, when anything that's not violent is therefore revisionism, when armed struggle becomes a way of life, it stops really serving the end of building communism, and it just becomes a criminal enterprise. And I think that the FARC had this problem in Colombia, right? Mao Zedong, in his Little Red Book, he famously said, the party must control the gun. The gun cannot control the party. Well, the Naxals are an example of the gun controlling the party, right? They have basically They have basically degenerated into a group of people that instead of engaging in violence for political ends, they engage in violence for violence sake. They've degenerated into a group of robbers and criminals, but they pretend that it's still political, and it's kind of sad, right? And let's not forget that these are desperate situations. People are very poor and they're struggling. But when you start murdering the leaders of legit communist parties, when you denounce the industrial working class of India and you only focus in the rural areas, you're not where it's at. So I urge people to, while we should never support, I would not support any government repression against the Naxals. I think there should be a blanket amnesty for all the Naxalites. I think that they should be given a blanket amnesty because, that the Indian government murdered a lot of innocent people in the fights with them. I think there should be a blanket amnesty for all members of the Naxal uprising. Blanket amnesty, no criminal charges. I would never support the government of India jailing or arresting Naxals. I think there needs to be a peace treaty declared with the Naxals. I think that they need to be allowed to form a legal party and participate in India's political process. At the same time, do not fall into the illusion that they are the vanguard of the revolution in India. 250,000 people are on strike right now in India, led by real communist parties, and these ultra-left adventurers, the Indian equivalent of like the Weather Underground or something, they're doing their thing. Full amnesty, reintegrate them into society, let them function legally, drop all charges against them, blanket amnesty for them. If they're not going to jail the government of India that murdered whole villages to fight them, they shouldn't jail the Naxals. So I'm for a full amnesty, drop all charges against them, but they're not where it's at. Stalin sold oil to Mussolini. Okay, we'll talk about that. Sold. Alrighty. Keep it coming with the super chats. Always happy to answer them during. All right. So that's an important point to make. But that brings me to another point. Jacobin Magazine. The folks know Jacobin Magazine. Of course you know Jacobin Magazine. They are advertised on MSNBC. But there's this publication that is supposed to represent socialist thought in the United States. It was launched on the internet, and for some reason, MSDNC, MSNBC, used to be owned by General Electric, a top military contractor. NBC decided just, that on their show, All In with Chris Hayes, they would just do a segment to, promote it. Right. I mean, that's what the capitalist media always does. It always, promotes socialist leaders, right? So Jacobin, which out of nowhere was declared the voice of all leftism and Marxism. They appear on CNN regularly. I've only appeared on CNN one time, and I'll tell you all that story about my one CNN appearance. That's a pretty wild story. Jacobin Magazine, just the U.S. State Department approved socialist voice, right? They decided at this moment, when 250 million workers in India are on strike, they decided to publish an article announcing that the left of India has failed. And, they found some professor, and no, the left of India is a complete failure. And it's are there some legit criticism? Are there some legit criticisms of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, or the Communist Party of India, or SUCI? Of course, there are some legit criticisms, right? I would say the CPI, Communist Party of India probably was a little bit too much tailing behind the Congress Party during the Popular Front period, during the Cold War. That's a legit criticism. Communist Party of India, Marxist. I mean, all of these groups, you can criticize things about them, okay? But, right, for Jacobin Magazine, a group that represents Trotskyites in America, right? This is the Trotskyite currents in the DSA. This is the remnants of the ISO and the International Socialist Organization, Cliffites and Shachtmanites. For them to call the Marxists of India, who have led 250 million people out on strike, failures, is like the pot calling the kettle black. I mean, good night. I mean, for them to, I'm sorry, what have American Trotskyites ever done that it in any way approaches what the communists of India are doing right now. 1934 in Minneapolis, the Teamsters strike was led by Trotskyites, and they did some good stuff. But other than that, I mean, since World War II, can you name one thing that was done by any Trotskyite group in the United States that was anywhere near as successful or impactful as what the Indian communists are doing now? Why in the world should we listen to Jacobin magazine tell us that the communists of India are failures when they're doing things, they're moving mountains compared to anything that any Western leftists, have done in a long, long time? I mean, it is unbelievable. At this moment, they decide to, just unleash their attacks, call them Stalinists. And this is the truth, folks. The Communist Party of India Marxists, they are friendly to Vietnam, friendly to China, friendly to Cuba, friendly to Venezuela, friendly to Russia. They are an anti-imperialist party through and through. They are Tankies. Right? Socialist Unity Center of India, no longer friendly to China, but super friendly to North Korea, super friendly to Vietnam, Cuba, right? Communist Party of India, friendly to Russia, friendly to China, friendly to Cuba. I mean, it is Tankies. It is Tankies that are leading the people of India in struggle right now. Progressive International. It is Tankies that are leading the people of India in struggle right now. Absolutely. It is Tankies that are doing it. And don't you doubt it. Don't you doubt it for a minute. Tankies are at the center of this struggle. And look at what's going on in India. Do you think that this strike would be happening? This huge, earth-shattering uprising of the people of India against neoliberalism. Do you think it would be happening if they demanded that all of these farmers and all of these workers in India immediately agree with the latest position of the transgender movement? Do you think it would be happening? Do you think that there aren't transphobic and homophobic workers that are part of this strike? Do you think that there aren't racist, or sexist workers that are part of this strike? There are, right? But the communists of India have the strength and the understanding that if somebody disagrees with them on a social issue, you don't spit on them, right? You don't declare them to be counter-revolutionary scum. You can build a united front with them around progressive demands. This is not a cancel culture strike, right? Now, the Communist Party of India Marxist is very pro-LGBT, and they have had protests for gay rights and for the rights of the LGBT community. But do you think that they have decided to engage in cancel culture? Do you think that the 250 million workers that are out on strike in India are people that agree 100% with BreadTube about every social and liberal issue? Of course not, right? That they have been smart enough to say, all right, you may not agree with us, right? The Communist Party of India Marxist is very pro-gay marriage, but I can bet you that they are leading divisions of workers that contain probably millions of workers who aren't pro-gay marriage. But they're okay with doing that, right? They haven't made social issues the do or die, right? They haven't decided that if you don't agree with them 100% on social liberalism, you are an evil Nazbol who needs to be destroyed. They haven't made that the dividing line, right? They haven't done that, right? Communist Party of India Marxist is very pro-LGBT. The other groups, not so much. Around the world, there are a lot of communists who think that homosexuality is bourgeois decadence and things like that. But the Communist Party of India Marxist, they march with rainbow flags. They are pro-LGBT, pro-trans, and all of that. But they are smart enough to realize that the way you win people to progressive positions is not by spitting on them and condemning them. That you can build a united front that brings the whole class forward. Right? And this is what people need to understand. If the Communist Party of India Marxist took the position that anyone who didn't agree with the transgender issue, anyone who was against gay marriage, which therefore was evil and had to be shut off, this strike would be tiny. It would be ridiculously small, but they haven't done that. They are mass organizers. They understand sometimes you have to work with people you don't agree with, right? Do you think we will see a return to any of the, a return protests in USA. All right, and South America trots St. Leon. All right, South American trots. All righty. So So, I mean, let's keep that in mind. Let's keep that in mind, right? And that people are very, very shallow, right? I mean, it's just like, the bread tube crowd, right? They might even tell you they support this strike. But if you take the position that any socialist who is defending the Soviet Union, defending Stalin, or defending Mao is the same as Hitler, you can't support this strike because it's led by people who like Stalin, right? Socialist Unity Center of India has big pictures of Stalin at all their rallies. Communist Party of India Marxist comes out of the Stalinist, current. I mean, in the Maoist current, they have big pictures of Mao, big pictures of Stalin at their rallies. CPI takes a little bit more of the Khrushchev, Soviet era, kind of position, but they come out of they were the Soviet aligned party. So anybody who takes this position that if you're a tankie, if you defend the USSR, if you defend China, if you don't agree with U.S. U.S. war in Syria, you're a Nazi, they have to condemn this strike. Right? They can't support this strike because all the major parties that are leading this strike are tanky parties, right? But see, the tanky parties in India, the three parties that are leading this strike have deep roots in the community. They have made a huge effort to build alliances in communities and neighborhoods. They feed people. They provide medical care to people. They run whole neighborhoods. They have mass organizations that care for people and organize people. These folks are not liberal bohemians. This is not the protest caves. These are mass parties with mass organizations that are getting to the people and getting stuff done in a way that Western leftists can only imagine. I mean, it's beyond anything we've ever seen from U.S. leftists, really, since the Black Panthers, since the 1930s Communist Party. That needs to be understood. So I wish that American leftists could understand and be more like the communists of India, not the Naxals, but the legit, responsible, real communist parties. When I met with these communists from India, when I met with them, they were wearing suits and ties. They spoke very professionally. These are professional organizers. They represent millions of people. These are real communists. They're not LARPers. They're not middle-class bohemians. They're not people on the internet. These are real communists, and that's what we need. We need serious professional revolutionaries, right? And the fact that Jacobin attacks them at this time, right? That shows what things are all about. Now, the fact that Jacobin is funded by the Jewish Communal Fund, which is an Israeli lobby group, right, that lobbies for Israel on America's college campuses. The fact that that's Jacobin's primary funder is quite interesting because we all know that Modi, the right-wing president who they're rebelling against, is very, very, very pro-Israel. Right, and that Modi is very anti-Islamic and very pro-Israel. So it's quite interesting that Jacobin is taking a swing at the communists of India who are organizing against Modi, who happens to be a big supporter of the entity that backs them. That's very interesting, very, very interesting, right? And it's also quite interesting, let me add, that there's piles of condemnation on me by the Jacobin crowd. Oh, Caleb, you work at RT. Oh, that's Russia bad. How dare you? But then they'll quote Jacobin, right? Israel is a pro-Western imperialist country, settler colonial state. Oh, it's fine to quote Jacobin, it's funded by them, but I'm supposed to be canceled, I'm supposed to be untouchable, because I work for a company from Russia, which is an anti-imperialist country. So, it really shows the pro-imperialist bias of the Trotskyites and the Jacobin crowd. Planning fail USSR. All right, writing it down. So, it's worth pointing that out, right? That when it really gets down to it, I mean, there's a lot of, the Proud Boys, the racist white supremacist organization, at their rallies, they actually chant, "West is the best. West is the best." That's a chant that they have, and that's really what the Jacobin crowd think, right? I mean, West is the best, right? All these anti-imperialist socialists around the world, they're all just a bunch of tankies. They're not hip, but Western liberal values, they're the message. I mean, have you noticed that Biden is announcing that he's going to appoint an African-American man to be the head of the Pentagon, right? To prove that the Pentagon is this human rights liberal organization that goes around spreading freedom around the world, to show that the United States is a hegemon of liberal values. The head of the Pentagon right, is going to be an African-American man, right? And this is, basically as the West, as Western imperialism gives itself an upgrade and tries to look like it's so much gotten over its chauvinist, colonial, racist past, now, there's a huge attempt to change the way imperialism looks. So there you go. I wanted to mention that, I'm good friends with a guy named Garland Nixon. Now, I don't talk about people I work with. Don't ask that. Now, Garland Nixon. He is a good friend of mine. He's on Sputnik Radio. He's on a show called The Critical Hour, which I go on. It's him and Dr. Wilmer Leon, another good friend of mine. He was invited to Venezuela to observe their recent election. He was in Venezuela to observe their recent election. And he called me today with the most wild story, which I mean, for some reason it must have been suppressed. It wasn't coming up in my news feed. I couldn't believe this. So as they were getting ready to fly back from Venezuela, the government of Colombia announced that Venezuela, that the airline they were flying on, that all these leftists that had come to Venezuela, they were being flown home on a government plane from Venezuela, that airline that they were flying on was banned from Colombia's airspace. And this was a plane full of leftists and election observers, a special plane chartered by the Venezuelan government. That the Colombian government banned their airplane from its airspace, said that this airplane could not fly through the airspace of Colombia. That was heavy. And it sent a message. And Vijay Prashad, the great intellectual, he was on this plane. The plane was full of socialists and communists and leftist academics and others. And they were trying to fly back home. And the government of Colombia announced that that plane was banned from their airspace. And they all got very, very nervous, very, very nervous that their plane might just get accidentally shot down. They were very worried about it because it seemed like the government of Colombia was basically making clear that that particular plane, full of election observers, chartered by the Venezuelan government, was being watched and would not be allowed in the airspace. So they ended up having a delayed flight. It took them a long time to get where they are. But it's very, very eerie, isn't it? It's very disturbing. That was basically a threat on the lives of every person on that plane. It was putting on notice, this plane is being watched, the government of Colombia is not letting it fly. It was a very, very, very eerie moment. So I am, and Garland Nixon, he called me, we just spoke. He's on his way back to the United States, and he observed the Venezuelan election, met with Venezuelan Chavistas and revolutionaries. He's got so much to say. This weekend, we are going to do an interview. He and I, we are going to talk. We are going to do an interview. It'll be up on YouTube this weekend. It hasn't happened yet. He's not back in the USA yet. We're going to talk about this plane and how it was targeted. We're going to talk about not only that. We're going to talk about what he saw in Venezuela in their election. So stay tuned for that. Garland Nixon is amazing guy. Check out his show, The Critical Hour. It's his show with Dr. Wilmer Leon. Both of them are amazing. So check it out. The other thing I just wanted to end my opening remarks by pointing out, this just has to be said, right? People may or may not want to hear this. I don't care. Before I get to that, I'll just add, all these people on social media who just say what'll get them clicks, right? They say what they think is going to be popular, what they think is going to get more Patreons, more clicks on their YouTube. I don't do that. I'm real with you all. I say things to you all that you don't want to hear, right? And that's because I'm real. I'm for real, right? Malcolm X in his speeches, he used to say, I know you don't want to hear this, but, right? If someone's real with you, they will tell you things that you don't necessarily want to hear. I'm not just here pandering to get applause. I'm telling you things you need to hear sometimes. So keep that in mind. So you may not want to hear what I'm about to say, but that's proof to you that I'm not a grifter. I'm not a social media hustler, right? I'm not playing a game. I'm not on here trying to make money. I have a job. I don't need to make money off this. It's nice to get a paycheck here and there, but I have another job. I'm not on here trying to make money. I'm on here trying to spread truth. And I'm about to point something out, right, that really ought to be pointed out. Folks, if you look at what's going on with Pfizer and the vaccine right now, there are two things that are apparent. Number one, Donald Trump is not a fascist. And number two, capitalism in the United States is at a complete and utter dead end. Folks, Donald Trump, right, really wants to get a vaccine out there. And they have made an arrangement with Pfizer, Pfizer and Moderna, these big, these big companies, Pfizer and Moderna, right, to make the vaccine. And so Pfizer started producing their vaccine. And they came back to Trump and they said, yeah, we've been selling it to other countries. I mean, they're only going to have like enough vaccines for 50 million people. Right? The U.S. government arranged for Pfizer, this big drug company, to have the vaccines for COVID-19. And they started selling vaccines to other countries, to Japan, to the European Union, to other countries. And the U.S. government is so weak that it cannot force Pfizer to do what it wants. It cannot force Pfizer to do what it wants. Right? The U.S. government has so little control over this huge drug company. So little ability to control the economy. Big drug companies have so much power. The government has so little power that they can't force Pfizer to only sell its vaccines to the U.S. government. The private property rights of Pfizer are being trumped, are trumping public rights. Donald Trump, when he came out to do his big vaccine thing, he said, I can invoke the Defense Authorization Act, but he won't. See, if Donald Trump was a fascist, fascism is a form of right-wing Bonapartism. It's one section of the ruling class taking control of the government and forcing its agenda to try and stabilize society, right? And it involves mass repression and killing. If Donald Trump was a fascist, right? Donald Trump clearly wants this vaccine everywhere because that'll make him look good, right? If he can get the vaccine, if he can be the guy that ended this pandemic, right? Maybe people will remember that and not how badly he screwed it up. But if Donald Trump was a fascist, if Donald Trump was Hitler, if Donald Trump was Mussolini, he could make Pfizer only sell their vaccine to the USA. He could force Pfizer to not sell it to other countries. Donald Trump is not a fascist, right? He's a weak, pathetic libertarian. He represents the lower levels of capital that resent the big capitalists. And he's racist. Yeah, he's brutal. I'm not endorsing Trump. But if Donald Trump was a fascist, he would be able to force Pfizer to do what he wants. He ain't a fascist. He's a weakling. He's a pathetic weakling, right? But Biden's not going to force Pfizer to do it either. This is why American capitalism is failing. The state, the government, is so weak that in the middle of a pandemic, American drug companies are making the vaccine. And our government is so pathetic that it cannot force the big drug companies to only give us the vaccine. Right? We've got Pfizer, this company, and you know what? They're like, hey, government, we're developing a vaccine, but we really want to sell it to Germany. We really want to sell it to Japan. So, we got like 50 million for you. Don't worry about it. Any other government in the world, right? The British government, the government of Germany, they would have the ability to go, you know what? You're our drug company. Our FDA gave you approval. No, you're selling it to our country. But our country is so free market and so neoliberal that the government is just going, oh, okay. And Pfizer is getting away with working. They're not even obeying. Big pharma should be brought up on crimes against humanity. I wouldn't believe. And it's the problem. The problem in the United States right now, and it's the same reason that our roads are crumbling. It's the same reason that we have the worst educational system in the Western world. Low test scores. It's the same reason that our water isn't properly being purified. Our government is weak and pathetic. It's weak and pathetic. It's not fascism. It's not communism. It's weak and pathetic. We are a libertarian country. We are the most free market country in the Western world. The government, we've gotten the government off our backs. We have just let the government, oh no, we can't have the government do anything. Freedom, we've privatized things, we got prisons for profit, right? What could go wrong with that? We got military contractors. We have the weakest and most pathetic government in the Western world. And the problem in the United States right now is not that there's too much state control of the economy. It's the opposite. There's not enough. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And the fact that even people calling themselves socialists can't even bring themselves to say that. Right? The Jacobin crowd says, oh no, we oppose state socialism. Socialism is just when you and your friends start an awesome, fun pencil factory and share the profits. Even the socialists in the United States are terrified of saying what everybody knows we need. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. It is blatantly obvious. We need a strong, powerful state that will take control of big companies like Pfizer and ExxonMobil and big corporations and big banks and force them to do what is in the interests of this country. It'll nationalize them. It'll make them public property. It'll force them to work in the interests of this country. That is what is needed. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We don't have that right now. Right? And even the socialists are too chicken and too libertarian to call for that, right? It is blatantly obvious. The fact that the U.S. government can't force Pfizer to give us vaccines. They can't force Pfizer to give us vaccines. The problem with the state in the United States is the state is weak. The state is weak. I mean, folks, I've used this analogy before, but maybe you haven't heard it, so I'll use it again. Right? If you're a parent and your kid is coming to school without being properly fed. If you're a parent and your kid, it's wintertime and they don't have gloves and a hat and they're freezing cold. If your kid, you're never there with them at home and they're just at home by themselves at a very young age, there's a name for that. That's called criminal neglect. And you can have your children taken away for it and you can go to jail for neglecting your child. Right? You as a parent, it's understood, you have a responsibility to feed your kid, to take care of your kid, to have your kid, have, warm clothes in the wintertime. And if you don't do it, you lose custody of your kid. It's called criminal neglect. The government of the United States at this hour is guilty of criminal neglect. If you look at the way they've handled this pandemic and let every state do whatever they want, where Donald Trump couldn't even tell his supporters to put an effing mask on, the government of the United States is guilty of criminal neglect. They have let the free market run rampant, and our roads are crumbling, and our schools are falling apart, and Pfizer says, we don't have enough vaccines for you. We're selling them to Japan. The government of the United States is guilty of criminal neglect. It has failed us. It has utterly failed us. And what is needed more than ever is popular power. We need a government like they have in Venezuela that is based in communities and labor unions and community assemblies, a strong government that goes to corporations, goes to bankers and says, you do what we say, you do what is in the interest of the country, or we seize your property and we make it public property, right? That we need the state to control the means of production. We need a popular government, a government of action that will fight for working families. That's what socialism is. And that's why China has gone from being one of the poorest countries in the world to being a global superpower. And that's why Russia was the first country in outer space. And that's why, there's so many things I can go over, right? But when the economy is allowed to just function according to whatever is profitable for the free market, it leads to this situation, right? It leads to this situation. Well, out of chaos cometh order, folks. People can only take this level of chaos for so long and before they start to demand that things get better. And I am very worried about what kind of order is going to come because we have gone down that liberal, free market, individualism, everyone does their own thing, government's best, the government's least. We have gone so far in that direction in the United States that our country is literally coming apart. And it's only a matter of time. You think Trump is scary. Trump is definitely scary, right? It's only a matter of time before the population is sick of this and they are demanding that the state intervene. If you think Trump is scary, wait till an actual fascist shows up. That's scary, right? And if the left doesn't become the voice promising order and stability, right? And if the left doesn't come in and promise and build up a government of action that fights for working families, somebody is going to come after Trump who's going to make Trump, look like Skippy the Bear. Okay? Somebody's going to come along who is going to be so racist and so right-wing and so authoritarian and so scary. And so much of the population is going to go along with it because they are going to be having it. If it gets to the point, where if the situation in the country with hunger, with unemployment, with crumbling infrastructure, if this stuff continues, people are going to start demanding authoritarianism, right? People wonder, why did William Z. Foster, right? William Z. Foster, he wrote a book called Towards Soviet America. He was the leader of the Communist Party in the 1930s. It's a great book. But there's a couple sections of that book that are they don't read too well, right? There's the section where he's talking about outlawing the YMCA, and he's going to outlaw every political party you ever heard of, and the Boy Scouts, and, nowadays, no communist would write that, right? Because we don't want to outlaw all these groups. I don't have a problem with the YMCA. I don't have a problem with the Boy Scouts. I mean, maybe I wish the Boy Scouts were not pushing, national chauvinism and free market ideology, but, what's wrong with it, right? But why did William Z. Foster, in his 1932 presidential campaign book, Toward Soviet America, write, this really uber authoritarian, manifesto? Well, he did it because people were literally starving to death in the United States. People were starving to death on our streets. Millions of Americans died of malnutrition in the early 1930s. No one ever talks about that, right? The Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, it was a man-made famine in the United States. And while that was happening, you saw all throughout U.S. society, there was a wave of authoritarianism. Roosevelt, when he first came in, sounded almost like he was going to be a dictator. He had the Blue Eagle, which was the symbol of the New Deal, and kids in school had to pledge allegiance to the Blue Eagle and the National Industrial Recovery Act. You had actual Nazi groups that were formed, right? The American Legion, was very friendly to Benito Mussolini. You had the Silver Legion of America. You had the Ku Klux Klan. You had the German American Bund, and that. Everyone throughout the United States, things were so bad that everybody wanted an authoritarian state to fix it. So the communists, in order to show people that they meant business, they were going to really get things done, they wrote this really authoritarian manifesto. Because when people are starving, when people are desperate, that's what they long for. This is what people don't get. Freedom is a luxury. Freedom comes with economic development and prosperity. Franklin Delano Roosevelt very famously said that hungry stomachs are what dictatorships are made of. When people are starving and desperate and hungry and poor, they want a government that is strong and is going to get shit done. And they are willing to tolerate all kinds of brutal repression if they can get food in their stomachs, right? And that's why the left needs to become the voice of saying, we will have a government of action that'll get things done. If the left remains, the club of video game players who want to open a pencil factory and share all the pencils, and we'll own the profits, and no one will be the boss of our pencil factory. If that's what the left is, if that's what the left remains, then whoever that scary actual fascist that's coming up behind Trump, that's who people are going to rally behind, right? Socialism is very authoritarian. It's the means of production, the centers of economic power, being controlled by society to work in the interests of all people, and that is authoritarian, right? It's not free market. It's not everyone. It's not everyone does whatever they want. The goal is to get to a world that is stateless and classless. But having the state control the economy, that's more authoritarian than letting every capitalist do whatever they want. And if we can't come to terms with that, if leftism and socialism cannot be a voice that's saying we advocate taking authority and taking dramatic measures to improve your lives, if leftism remains the happy, fun, Skippy pencil club, right? If that's what leftism remains, then the scary, racist, murderous, genocidal fascist who's coming behind Trump after Trump's failures, right? The actual fascist, the actual brutal authoritarian fascist that's coming to try and resolve the crisis in a Bonapartist matter with mass destruction, that fascist is going to be who people rally behind. And I know y'all don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that, right? You don't want to hear that from me, right? You don't want to hear that from me. But anarcho-communism, anarcho-Bidenism, anarcho-liberalism is dangerous. It's extremely dangerous for this reason. This is why anarcho-Bidenism is dangerous, because hungry stomachs are the thing that dictatorships are made from. And when Americans are hungry and desperate, they need to be able to turn to socialists and communists, because if not, they're going to turn to people that we really, really don't like. I can guarantee you that. And that may be hard for some people to swallow. But again, if I was a grifter, I wouldn't say that. If I was a grifter, I would say all the kind of things that you all want to hear. You don't want to hear this, but I'm telling you what you need to hear. I'm telling you what you need to hear, because this is what you need to hear. We need a government of action to fight for working families. That is what we need. And if we, Marxists, leftists, and socialists, don't become the voice of that, the implications down the road are very, 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 very extreme. So on that note, folks, I've been full of energy today, but I got plenty more unnamed diet beverage. Names and locations, names and locations. Who's with us today? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? Kendall in San Diego, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Niagara Falls, Jerry Young, PA, USA, Ollie from Northern Ireland, a Sunny Park, Brazil, Toronto, Canada, Norway, Arctic Angel, Eureka, Illinois, Jesus from Spain, Jesus, don't make it bad. There's Ears Burn for Knowledge, Peter from Poland, Brooklyn, New York City, Sarawak, Dublin, Colin in Amsterdam, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, who's now a mod. You've been promoted, Jenny. Berlin, Germany, Arthur Porter from Arizona, longtime mod. Gateshead, England, New Hampshire, visiting the Gulf Coast, Frankfurt, Germany, Los Angeles, Union, New Jersey, Eli from Chicago, Miguel from Puerto Rico, New York, Egypt, Flushing, New York, Vancouver, Canada, Columbus, Ohio, Julian from Texas, South Shore, Long Island, Kensington, California, Crimson, Terre Haute, Indiana, Hamburg, Germany, St. George, Utah, Trevor in Ireland, Kieran in San Diego, Austin, Texas, Freehold, New Jersey, Jenny Lynn, Well Said, North Carolina, Comrade, Brighton, UK, Kingston, Ontario, Canada, Corona, California, Denmark, Space Communist, Missouri, Tetuan, Morocco, Bubba from Afghanistan, Shah from Maryland, Orange County, Trumpland, Gotta Go, Take Care, Studio City Call, Communists in Montana, Represent, Washington State, Long Island, New York. Well, you know, it's weird. For a long time, the leader of, one of the leaders of the Revolutionary Communist Party, years ago, like in the 70s, was a guy from Montana. His name was, what was his name? He was like he was a Montana communist. What was his name? I cannot remember his name. Oh my goodness, what is his name? He was the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, not Bobavakian. Before Bobavakian, there was this guy who was older, he'd been in the CPUSA, and he was a leader, and he was from Montana, and his name is escaping me. What is his name? What was his name? Can't remember his name, but he was a leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party. He was from Montana, a big Maoist. All right, Leningrad, USSR, the Netherlands, Montville, New Jersey, Fairhope, Alabama, Apex, North Carolina, Dust James, great intro. I'm glad you liked it. Northern Lower Michigan, Atlanta, Jerusalem, Israel, LA, California, Washington State. Label Bergman. His name is Label Bergman. Naples, Florida. Google Label Bergman. He was the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party up until 1979, I believe. He had a fight. He was pro-China when Bob turned against China. Naples, Florida. Dan from Iran. Wisconsin. Leipzig, East Germany. Montana Maoist. Harrisburg. Lockport, New York. Ireland. Yeah. Label Bergman. Nassau County. Char Char Darling. Welcome, welcome. Label Bergman was his name. And he was pro-China, and he was kind of a mentor to Bobavakian. France, and Bob and him had a big falling out when Deng Xiaoping came to power. New France, Patrick from Attica, New York, very good. Captain Squid, Las Vegas. All right. It's funny. I'm about to open another can of unnamed diet beverage. And it's funny because, I mean, I'm about to open this can off screen, but it sounds like I'm cocking a gun. You know what I mean? Doesn't that sound like I'm cocking a gun? I mean, I can't get over that sound. You know, I mean, it's just I'm pouring the unnamed diet beverage, not on screen because I don't want to give the advertising to the corporate logos. But there you go. Alrighty, so we got some super chats to get through, and then that'll be our surprise afternoon live. All right, readings for older relatives who love capitalism. Well, the best introductory text I have ever read is called "Why Communism: Plain Talk on Vital Questions" by Moishe Olgin. Moishe Olgin. And it's a very good book. It's very short. The opening essay is called "The Malady," and it's a very, very good essay. And that book overall, "Why Communism: Plain Talk on Vital Questions," is probably the best introductory communist pamphlet I've ever read. It's from 1934. Moishe Olgin, "Why Communism: Plain Talk on Vital Questions." So yeah, there you go. All righty. All right. Problems with modern Russia. Well, there's a lot of corruption in Russia, and that's one thing that many people have criticized. When I was embedded with the Communist Party during their 2018 election, Ron Dugan. All right. When I was embedded with the Communist Party on 2018, on election night, I actually got to meet Zhuganov, and I got to meet their presidential candidate, Pavel Grudinin. I was at their office, and one of the main criticisms they had is they argued that, Russia, at this point, the state is very heavily involved in the economy. Gazprom and Rosneft are both, state-run entities, and there's a lot of state-run enterprises and such. But the way that the wealth from state-run enterprises is handed out is somewhat nepotistic. And that there's a lot of, that it would be possible, was their argument, that Russia could have a bigger welfare state, could provide better schools, could provide a better standard of living to the population, but that there's a little bit of an issue with how the state-run industries and how the proceeds from them are handed out. And that's a criticism I've heard, and that was basically the platform of the Communist Party in that election, was they argued that Russia needs to give more health care, it needs to give more social benefits to the population. But Russia, compared to the United States, it has a much bigger welfare state. I'll tell you that much, right? I mean, the paid maternity leave in Russia is way longer, guaranteed health care, for the population. So it's a little bit, compared to what we have here in the United States, where you're on your own, basically. I mean, Russia has a much bigger welfare state than we have, but it could be better, they argued. And, I mean, maybe they're right. That's what they communicated to me. I heard their arguments. And many people who voted for the Communist Party, they understood Putin is so popular in Russia that he was going to win. But that by voting for the Communist Party, they were kind of sending a message to Putin that we would like you to implement policies that are more in line with what the Communist Party believes. And the Communist Party emphasizes a social welfare state. And then you'll notice that the opposition from the right wing in Russia was the Liberal Democratic Party. And they were the authoritarian party that talked about re-implementing the death penalty and stuff like that, and was very anti-Islamic and stuff. So, I think that, and the Communist Party, there is certainly a wing of the Russian state that feels like they need to be more socialistic and provide more social benefits to the population. And Pavel Grudinin, the leader of Lenin Farms Cooperative, and, he's a billionaire, but he's very much a communist. And, he represents that wing of the Russian state bureaucracy that feels like they need to be more socialistic. And there's a lot of people who agree with him. So there you go. You'll notice that Putin criticized Lenin a few years back, and then the Communist Party got very angry about it. So then he came out and he gave a very, very nice speech praising Lenin, and talking about how a lot of the ideals of Leninism and Bolshevism are similar to the ideas of the Bible. You should read what Putin has said about Lenin and about communism. It's actually kind of fascinating. Putin's not a communist. He's not a Marxist. But he's not an anti-communist either. He has a very nuanced view that people should look into. I don't speak for them or anything, but the more you look into it, people want to make it all or nothing. They want to make it things are not that simple. The world is not that simple. It's never as simple as you think. The truth is stranger than fiction. All right. The UN was unable to stop the execution of the leader of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. That's true, yeah. That after, let's not forget. So, the Soviet Union. Let's just talk about what happened, right? Afghanistan borders the Soviet Union, Central Asian country, very, very poor country. It had been ruled by the British at one point in the 1800s. Then you had the rise of the Amirs, They had the emirs that were like anti-imperialist Muslims, and they fought against the British and drove them out. After the Russian Revolution, Lenin convened a conference of the peoples of the East, also known as the Baku Conference, and the emir of Afghanistan and Lenin shook hands. And Lenin said, we'll support anyone against the British and against the Western imperialists. Even the emir of Afghanistan, you're a right-wing guy, you're a monarch, but even you are better than the British Empire. And Lenin and the emir of Afghanistan shook hands. They were good buddies, even though they didn't agree, right? And that's Bolshevism, mind you. Lenin said, you will support anybody is better than Western imperialism. Imperialism impoverishes and destroys countries, but when countries break free, it leads to better economic development, even if it's the most right-wing reactionary government. So Lenin had no shame embracing the emir of Afghanistan, this right-wing, autocratic, authoritarian, traditional, conservative leader. Lenin embraced him because he was fighting the British. And the British Empire was trying to take control of Afghanistan. And Lenin said, we support the emir of Afghanistan. And the Soviet Union gave guns and weapons and support and military training to the emir of Afghanistan to fight the imperialists. So that's one thing you have to understand. But, they had the Conference of the Peoples of the East, and, the movie Reds tries to smear the Bolsheviks over that. If you ever see Warren Beatty's Reds, they kind of show this conference in a negative light, and it's a whole thing, and John Reed didn't actually go to it. That's a whole other thing. So Afghanistan, right, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union is always trying to be friendly to Afghanistan. In the 70s, Afghanistan, they have a pro-U.S. government, pretty much. It's like a pro-American monarchy government. But there is a huge political party in Afghanistan called the People's Democratic Party, which is the pro-Soviet. It's a communist party. It's the People's Democratic Party. So, Afghanistan is mildly pro-American. It's not on the Soviet side during the Cold War, but there's this huge political party that a lot of military officers are in, and they're pro-Soviet. So Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, he bragged that he set up what he called the Afghan trap. And what he did is he went to the monarchy, the CIA and American intelligence went to the monarchy in Afghanistan and said, start murdering the leaders of the People's Democratic Party, which the monarchy of Afghanistan did not want to do. The monarchy of Afghanistan was not communist, but they were kind of happy to have a pro-Soviet party there that was, it was like a show that they could kind of play both sides. Well, the USA and the CIA forced Afghanistan to start murdering the leaders of the People's Democratic Party. So, of course, the People's Democratic Party, they didn't want to be slaughtered, so they overthrew the government. In 1978, in Afghanistan, you had what was called the Sour Revolution. And it was forced, right? And it was kind of glorious. Like, they had rounded up some leaders of the People's Democratic Party, and the military tore down the walls of the jail and freed them. And it was in Afghanistan cities, the People's Democratic Party was forced to take power. They had a huge amount of support in the cities. They did not have support in the countryside. And this is the important thing. In the cities, the pro-Soviet party was pretty much, almost everybody was sympathetic to the Soviet Union in the cities, right? In the rural areas, however, the people were very conservative and religious. They didn't so much support it. But, the People's Democratic Party is forced to take power in Kabul. So they take power. And immediately, like clockwork, Saudi Arabia and Osama bin Laden, with direction from the United States, start sending terrorists into the countryside. Like, fight the infidels, fight the communist non-believers. So Brzezinski admitted that this was a whole strategy by the CIA. This was a whole strategy. It was called, they wanted to give the Soviet Union their own Vietnam. And it worked, right? And the Soviet Union, all of a sudden now, Afghanistan, which was a pro-U.S. country, but they had a pro-Soviet part. All of a sudden now, Afghanistan is a hotbed of terrorists and fanatics. And the terrorists and fanatics in Afghanistan, mind you, they didn't want to just overthrow the People's Democratic Party. Oh, no. Their goal was to eventually spread throughout the entire southern USSR. They wanted to arm all the Muslims of the southern USSR, and they wanted to wage like an Islamic insurgency throughout all of the USSR. That's what they were talking about. They wanted to build like an Islamic caliphate all throughout the USSR. And, Brzezinski had been working with Osama bin Laden and all of them, and they were having huge Wahhabi conferences, and Muslims from all over the Arab world and on Africa were all going to Afghanistan, and this was the new holy war, the new jihad. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare, right? And so the Soviet Union had no choice. Of course, they're going to send their military to Afghanistan to try and put it down. Well, in the late 80s, right? And so, the Soviet Union is fighting the terrorists in Afghanistan, trying to support the People's Democratic Party, which didn't want to take power, which was forced to take power to avoid being massacred. So then, Gorbachev is meeting with Ronald Reagan, and as the Soviet Union is falling, Ronald Reagan says to Gorbachev, hey, stop sending the military to Afghanistan. And Gorbachev's like, oh, okay, I'll do that, because Gorbachev is a sellout and a phony and whatever. Oh, we'll stop. So the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan, right? But you'll have to remember that the Soviet Union fell in 1991. But the People's Democratic Party was so popular, right? It had taught people to read. It had built farms and agricultural. It had done so much that without Soviet support, without any Soviet support, with no Soviet backing, until 1993, they were still winning the war. And finally, in 1993, they lost the war. And the forces that they called the Northern Alliance, right? The Northern Alliance took power. And then they were Islamists, right? They were anti-Soviet. The Northern Alliance took power. But then, from within the Northern Alliance, there was a breakaway called the Taliban. So the Taliban, it's a little bit complicated. People say the USSR brought the Taliban to power. No, the USA brought the people that the Taliban broke away from to power, right? The Northern Alliance was a little more moderate, right? They were a little more secular. And within the Northern Alliance, there was a faction called the Taliban. The Taliban was an extremist breakaway from the Northern Alliance. They took power, and yes, they executed all kinds of communists, and the UN tried to stop it, and the whole world was like, stop this, and couldn't stop them. It was awful. It was awful. But the Taliban also, let's remember, they got rid of the heroin trade, right? That in order to fund the terrorist activities of the Mujahideen and all that, the CIA had set up all kinds of poppy fields. Well, the Taliban were so fanatically religious, they started burning the poppy fields and executing drug dealers also. The UN gave some awards to the Taliban because they killed all these drug dealers and they stopped the drug trade. So the Taliban did some good things, but largely they came to power as a result of this whole process, which Zbigniew Brzezinski bragged about with an interview with a French magazine. He said, "Oh, I set up the Afghan trap. Ha ha ha! I gave the Soviet Union their Vietnam. Ha 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 ha! It was a nightmare, right? The man, Osama bin Laden, who is named by U.S. media as the man who brought down the Twin Towers, was like this with the Carter administration, with the Reagan administration. Ronald Reagan was buddy-buddy with Osama. Zbigniew Brzezinski and Jimmy Carter were buddy-buddy with Osama. But we're supposed to all hate Iran. Focus on hating Iran, right? Don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right? But remember, hate Iran, hate Iran. I mean, this is how ridiculous the dialogue in the United States is. Very, very ridiculous. I have said, someone asked me to clarify what I'm saying about voter fraud, right? There was some foul play that went on in the election, but Biden won by millions of votes. Biden is the legit president-elect of the United States. That's my position, right? There was some malfeasance that went on, okay? And when you try to deny that, don't deny that, okay? Biden won. Biden won the election, right? The fraud was not enough to do anything, but there was some stuff that went on. Let's not deny there wasn't some funny business that went on. How about the Nevada Native Voter Project? How about that? That's not legal. That they have this rewards program for Native Americans in Nevada. Hey, if you're of a certain race and you vote, you get your name in a raffle to win $500. That ain't legal. That is not legal at all. You cannot give people cash incentives to vote. You especially cannot give people cash incentives to vote only of a certain race, and that race happens to all vote for one party. What they did with the Native Voter Project, that's illegal. Give me a break. Now, does that mean we have to throw out every Native American's vote in Nevada? No, you can't do that. You can't do that, right? The Native Americans have the right to vote, but the Democratic Party and the Native Voter Project, yeah, give me a break. Give me a break, right? Let's imagine that Donald Trump started a program, we're going to have the white people, the White People Voter Project, and any white person who votes gets their name, in a raffle. I mean, come on, you can't do that, right? What the Democrats did in Nevada, not legal. And somebody will probably get prosecuted or go to jail for the Native Voter Project. That's foul play. But, does it change the election results? Nope. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. right? And you know, did some dead people vote? Of course, yeah. Here in New York, people got arrested for voting in the place of dead people. Dead people voted in various places. Not enough to change the results. Biden won by millions and millions of votes, so yes, you know, it's not a football game. And I've said this over and over again. It's not a football game. The U.S. presidential election is not a football game, okay? In the football game, if the referee sees the other side cheating, he says, you cheated, and he gives it to the other team by default. U.S. presidential election's not a football game, right? Yep, Democrats cheated, Republicans cheated too, but Biden still won. The cheating didn't make enough of a difference, so just forget it. Just throw that out. Biden won the election. You know, and I mean, I've made that analogy before, and what annoys me is that it's like now in liberal circles, we have to pretend that like Biden is Mr. Squeaky Clean, that he never did anything wrong. No, Biden, there was some malfeasance that goes on in every election. Look, the United States is a country like any other, right? Our elections here, you know, every election in the world, you're going to have some shady, funny business that goes on both sides usually. And, you know, Biden's side, you know, I mean, there was some shady, funny business that went on. Let's not deny that. Was there problems with Trump and all that? Oh, you betcha there was. There was voter suppression. They tried to, you know, to make it more difficult for low-income people to vote in certain states. There was plenty of funny business on Trump's side too. So none of this invalidates the election results. So did Biden, or did USSR die with Stalin? All right. So let's just be clear about that, right? Did funny business go on? Yes. Does it mean that Biden is not the legit winner? No. Biden won the election, but yes, there was some funny business that goes on. Again, folks. Nuance. All right. Okay. All righty. Public school uniforms. I don't know. I mean, socialist countries tend to have public school uniforms, you know. When I was a kid, I remember being the only kid in the class who thought we should have public school uniforms. But then I remember when I was in high school, there was a big or when I was in college, I remember there were big student strikes in various parts of the country that were organized over social media against school uniforms, and that was kind of interesting. So I don't know. I mean, you know, school uniforms can be good, they can be bad. It just depends how they're implemented, right? You know, but you know, some people complain that school uniforms can be like, you know, but in other cases it makes all the kids equal, right? I mean, it doesn't make school not a fashion show. There's no in crowd that have like fancy, nice clothes and other kids don't, so it's more equalizing. That's a progressive aspect, but some say it's, you know, I don't know. I mean, I just don't know, right? I will say that that in a lot of the urban areas of the United States, school dress codes and you know, school dress code policies are implemented in a way that is pretty harsh and repressive. In the name of opposing gangs, they will be very, very harsh to school kids who don't dress the right way, right? The kid wears an orange shirt, they're like, orange is the color of this gang. He's suspended from school for 10 days. He goes to juvenile hall. That's bullshit, right? And that shouldn't happen, right? And that alone makes me upset that, you know, I mean, a lot of these charter schools in urban areas, they use the dress code in the name of fighting gangs to really make kids miserable, to just make kids miserable. They do the same things with the weapons rules and stuff, and, you know, so, you know, let's remember that I don't think there's anything inherently wrong, you know, with school uniforms, but at the same time, like any other policy, it can be abused. What jobs are the best for Marxists to take out of the current paradigm? Okay, jobs for Marxists. Okay, public school uniforms. All right. Did Stalin sell oil to Mussolini during World War II? Not while the war was actually going on. Well, not when the Soviet Union was in the war. But, you know, during the 1930s, it's true. Yeah, I mean, the Soviet Union sold oil to anybody they could. I mean, Nazi Germany did business with the Soviets, and so did the British, and so did the Americans, right? I mean, you know, I mean, there were all kinds of American engineers and stuff who went to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was trying to develop economically during the 1930s. They did business with the British. They did business with the Americans. The Koch brothers. Where do do you think their money came from? It came from the fact that Fred Koch, their dad, he was an oil chemist in the United States, and he was put out of business by frivolous lawsuits by big oil companies. So he moved to Russia, and he set up the Soviet oil industry. Does that mean the Soviet is a Koch brothers collaborator or something? Come on now. The Soviets, they did business with all kinds of people, and they had oil and they sold it, right? Now, you have to remember also that all throughout the 1930s, the Soviet Union called for an anti-fascist pact. They asked every major capitalist country to sign an anti-fascist pact. Only one country did, France, and then after the Popular Front government was voted out of power, France betrayed that agreement. Well, 1939 came along, and, basically there was a situation where they had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. Well, that was a necessary pact, and while that pact was still in effect before the Nazis broke it, the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union was neutral, right? It was not supporting either side during World War II because the British, the Americans, the French, all these countries had blown off the Soviets, and the Soviets had supported the people of Spain in their fight against fascism, and they've been the only country to do it. And so, yes, they signed that pact, and while that pact was in effect, there were some trade with the Nazis. But that pact was ultimately betrayed, and then the Soviets played a very heroic role in defeating the Nazis, right? That sometimes socialist countries have to make alliances with people, right? People don't understand that you want to moralize everything, right? But it's like if you're a country that's struggling to develop, right, raise your people out of poverty, and you're facing, inevitably there's going to be an invasion. At some point, the capitalist powers are going to invade you again, right? 15 countries invaded the Soviet Union right after World War I was over, and they knew it was going to happen again. It was only a matter of time. As soon as the economy crashed in 1929, the clock started ticking as when World War II was going to happen, and they were going to be a major target. They made alliances, and they tried to get by, and they tried to struggle. And you want to say, oh, they should have done this, they want to have done that. Well, you weren't there. You weren't in their circumstances. Everything they did may not have been right, but it was done out of a place of desperation, right? And they accomplished miracles in spite of everything that went wrong. They raised millions from poverty. They built a modern country. So please, the moralistic judgment there, my goodness. Would you have done the same thing? We don't know. Michael Parenti and Gerald Horne. Right? It's funny. What's interesting is Trotsky. Trotsky, his position on the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, on the Stalin-Hitler, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, his position on it is actually rather nuanced. Trotsky said that the pact was necessary, but that the Soviets should have presented it differently. They presented it in an unprincipled way. Most trots, make it sound like that pact should never have been signed or anything. But Trotsky himself, I don't agree with that. Trotsky himself, he actually admitted that the pact was necessary, and he said they should have done it sooner. But, and actually, it's very funny. There's a stupid song that Trotskyites recorded. They actually recorded a stupid song to attack the Soviet Union over the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And just to entertain you all, I will sing it to you. It's a real song. You can find it. You can find it on YouTube. It's a song written by Trotskyites to attack the Stalin-Hitler Pact. Up in Moscow, in the Kremlin, in the fall of '39, there's a Russian and a Prussian riding up the party line. Leon Trotsky was a Nazi, and we knew that for a fact. Pravda said it, we all read it, until the Stalin-Hitler Pact. Now old Trotsky, once a Nazi, that was then the party line, but now the Nazis are hotsy-totsy. Trotsky is setting British minds. That was the dumbest thing, to the tune of My Darling Clementine. The Trots were like singing this stupid song about the Stalin-Hitler Pact. So there you go. There needs to be more of that, it used to be communists, that used to be like a part of communist culture. We made spoof songs of whatever the popular songs were at the time, we would spoof them. There were some kids on the internet who went viral. They did a video to the tune of I Kissed a Girl and I Liked It, and they did I Read Some Marx and I Liked It. That was great. We need more of that. We need more Marxist parodies of popular songs. So work on that. If anyone's here's a musician, work on that. Find a popular hit song that all the Zoomers are singing and rewrite the lyrics to be about Marxism. Do that. I order you to do that. If you do not do that, me, Caleb, the leader of my evil personality cult, will I don't know. I'm just kidding, right? I'm laughing because the people that attack me are so ridiculous, right? I, Caleb, the evil authoritarian, now order you, yes, you, to write a parody song. And if you do not do this, all hell shall come down upon you. Be terrified. I'm just kidding, of course, right? I mean, this is how these people characterize me. So, whatever. Alrighty. All right. The Progressive International. Progressive International is an international think tank that was set up. Yanis Varoufakis, the economist, is involved. Jeffrey Sachs, who was a big advocate of free market, neoliberal economics in the 90s, but has now moved in a liberal direction. He's out of Columbia University. He's a neoliberal economist who's tied to George Soros. He's part of it. Bernie Sanders is part of it. They're not communists, they're not like Marxists, but they're progressive, right? They're in favor of a more mixed economy, Keynesianism, and it's worth paying attention to. Some people have said I said they're bad. I'm not saying they're bad. It's a good development. I'm glad it exists, but it's not. Let's be clear. They're not communists. They're social democrats. They're but whatever. I'm glad it exists. I'm glad Bernie Sanders and AOC and Jeffrey Sachs and others are involved in an effort to question neoliberalism. That's not a bad thing. I think Naomi Klein is involved with it as well, and glad it's around. But it's different than what we talk about on here. That's my only point. It's a little bit different than what we're talking about. Right, it's kind of like that book that came out with the French guy, Thomas Piketty. He had that book, Capital in the 21st Century. Well, that's good. He's criticizing free market policies, but there are some big problems. Like he doesn't recognize the role of social movements. He doesn't recognize, if you read Thomas Piketty's book, that's kind of what these folks think, right? We've all been too free market. Well, thank goodness somebody said that. It's about time somebody said that, but is that the end-all answer to everything? No, there's a lot more to it than just we've all been too neoliberal. Like capitalism itself, capitalist production, is the problem, right? And the reason that all these reforms to capitalism were implemented is because of mass revolutionary social movements. And so that's missing from a lot of that stuff. So whatever. Alrighty. Okay. Okie dokie. All right. Will there be a return of economic protests in the USA? Yes, there will be. As people get hungry, they start to protest, they start to resist. Yes, there will be. South American Trots sent people to Libya and stuff. Well, okay. Trotskyism is a very, very divided sectarian movement. The bulk of Trotskyites are counter-revolutionary, but there are some exceptions, right? There was this very strange group in Britain that was very pro-Libya and pro-Iraq that were headed by Jerry Healy, and they were very pro-Palestinian, and they seemed to be pretty anti-imperialist. They were pretty weird. They had a lot of strange practices and ideas, but the Healyites, for example, they were pretty anti-imperialist. And even now, the World Socialist website is like a breakaway from the Healyites. And, while they don't recognize any country in the world today as socialist, they still have a more or less anti-imperialist outlook. They expose the lies in the lead up to war to Libya. They're very supportive of Julian Assange. So they come out of Trotskyism, but they're anti-imperialist. And there are various Trotskyist groups that do that. Trotskyism, again, it's so sectarian. There's a weird UFO Trotskyist group, the Posadaists, right? And they're wacky UFO Trotskyites, right? Who went to Cuba and attacked foreign embassies in the hopes of sparking wars. And there's all kinds of Trotskyism is especially what you call Orthodox Trotskyism, right? The wackadoo Trotskyism, the Trotskyism that is just wackadoo, wackadoo, wackadoo. The Spartacists and the the Fifth League, the 12th International Committee, the Fourth Foundation. I divide Trotskyism into three categories. Neo-Trotskyites, those are people that are like ISO or, Cliffites. They don't believe they're not anti-imperialists, right? They hate all existing socialism. They've never seen a CIA color revolution they don't like. They're anti-Soviet 100%. Then there's what you call mainline Trotskyites. And that's, like Socialist Alternative, the old SWP. They believe in labor unions. They're always trying to get, the labor unions to form a labor party. They're all about labor unions. They're kind of supportive of Cuba and Venezuela, kind of, but not really. It's always like they kind of will support socialist countries, but not really. It like pains them to do it, but sometimes they might take an anti-imperialist position, but it like pains them because, oh my God, I don't want to be a Stalinist. But then there is this third category of wackadoo Trotskyites. And the wackadoo Trotskyites, like on Ukraine, for example, some of them actually understood that the Crimea thing and took good positions in 2014. And some of them, will support Gaddafi and things like that. The wackadoo Trotskyites, they're all wackadoo, right? And so it's like they sometimes they'll like by default accidentally take good positions and stuff. There was a whole like weird Trotskyist like guerrilla warfare current in the Fourth International in like the 70s. They were like Trotskyites that were encouraging guerrilla warfare, and that's a whole other story. But anyway, so there you go. Did examples of planning failing in the USSR? I'm going to answer this quickly because we're running out of time. But there are many examples of times when especially in the 80s. The Soviet Union needed reform. The kind of momentum, when you have a completely state-run economy, when everything is run by the government, there begins to be kind of a culture of laziness that kind of sets in, right? Where it's like when people feel like, we can't really get ahead, the oomph that you had during the Stalin years and the 5-year plans, after you fully industrialized, there becomes kind of a malaise that comes over the economy. And that's why you need a market sector and you need, different things, right? That really existing socialism, after you fully industrialize the country, right? First there's this rush to industrialize, but when it just becomes, production, there's a lot of people who are just kind of like, I want to, people are not excited anymore, right? There's kind of a malaise that sets in. So I know what you're getting at. All right, is Iran an example of Alexander Dugin? I don't know. Dugin is a Russian nationalist Orthodox Christian. The Iranians are Shia Muslims. But when Dugin wrote this book, Fourth Political Theory, he argued that there's rising around the world a kind of anti-liberal current that has elements of the left and the right in it. So I guess you could argue that Iran is that, right? It's very conservative Muslim, but also very anti-capitalist. So you could argue that's kind of what Dugin is observing in his book, Fourth Political Theory, right? And again, like, why is that not allowed to be discussed? Like, why does that make it toxic? Oh, you said Dugin, there might be some insights. The Venezuelans told me to read Dugin. The Iranians told me to read Dugin. All over the developing world, people are reading Dugin. So, I don't agree with him. He's a conservative intellectual, right? His views are very different than mine, but he's an important thinker, and he has some good observations about how the world is moving. So why is it toxic? Oh my God. It's just, these people are so West is the best. It's like, oh, Western media told me to hate Dugin, thou shalt hate Dugin, let's quote Jacobin, funded by the Israel lobby. Just give me a break. It's pro-Western bias. All right, did the USSR die with Stalin? No, it didn't. Stalin died in 1953, 54, and the Soviet Union existed until 1991. But, I think, like, everything comes from someplace, right? So Stalin, as I've pointed out many times, was kind of a synthesis, right? It was a form of socialism that could work under those circumstances, right? Stalin was a little bit of a, he developed the Soviet system to work. And then as the world changed, post-World War II and all of that, the Soviet system started to have problems, and the Soviet system needed to change, didn't change, so it broke. But, that Stalin, people want to make it like Stalin in his personality was, no, Stalin came from someplace. He came from material conditions, unique historical conditions created Stalin. Unique historical conditions created what came after Stalin. You have to understand things from a material perspective, not in terms of personalities, who's good, who's bad. All right. Jobs for Marxists. Look, Marxists do all kinds of jobs, right? I've got people who do all kinds of jobs. I got a friend who's an auto worker. I've got a friend who works as a mental health professional, and he works at a home for mentally disturbed young people who've had difficulties. He's out I think he's in Pennsylvania, and he's working with mentally disturbed youth, and he does great work. I know Marxists that are teachers. I know Marxists who are there's Marxists who are lawyers. I mean, look, whatever, right? You can do whatever. One thing I would say is that, I would encourage people, if you want to do a regular non-political job, to not work under the same name that you do politics under. And this is actually very good, especially in this day and age where anyone can Google anything. If you are looking to get a non-political job, you want to be a teacher, you want to be a factory worker, you want to be an Uber driver or something, I would urge you to do politics under a different name, because you don't want to ever have to, deal with that on the job. You don't, right? It's better to just, leave work at work, don't discuss communism at work, unless maybe you're involved in a union struggle or something like that. For the most part, if it's a non-political job, leave work at work and have a separate name that you're known as in political circles. Keep them separate, because this stuff can destroy you on the job. I know people who've been, there's a friend of mine who was she was an auto worker, and she got really viciously bullied, and the union didn't protect her, and that was awful. And that, leave work at work. There you go. That's my opinion. All right. Michael Parenti and Gerald Horne. Gerald Horne is great, African-American scholar. Michael Parenti is great. Michael Parenti's book, The Culture Struggle, is very good. There's a lot of good works by Parenti. Parenti's book on Julius Caesar is tremendous. Michael Parenti is great. And so is Gerald Horne. They're both great. I like both of them. So there you go. All right, folks. I think that's where we're going to cut it off for today. That's where we're going to cut it off for today. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Compare Trots versus Stalin to MLs versus Khrushchev. Don't have time to do that, Default. We're wrapping it up, but thanks for the question. A new upsurge in the struggle, a danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared. But revolution is the main trend in the world today. Remember that we need a government of action to fight for working families. Remind me next time, Default, to answer that question. Just remind me. Thanks. We need a government of action that'll fight for working families. Have a good night.